All right. So I mentioned this a little bit, but I want to just give a quick overview of what I hope that you're going to take away from our time together this evening here. As I mentioned, I want to make sure that everybody has a shared understanding of what it is that we're talking about. So we'll spend a little time going over some basic terminology and some concepts around funding and around factors that can impact when you might be applying for it and other things related to eligibility. Then we'll get a little bit more nuts and bolts in terms of the different opportunities that are available, the different sources of funding that you might seek out, the times and different types of programs when you might consider doing so, and some resources for how to identify what sort of options might be the best fit for you. We'll talk briefly about some common application materials, and then I'll wrap up at the end by sharing some additional support that my office, National Fellowships, is able to provide all of you with this. But first, some silly cartoons to try to get us thinking about recognizing that this is a subject that can sometimes be a source of a little bit of anxiety. You may have heard from professors in your program about how you should be applying for external awards, or you may know that grant writing is something that's important for the program that you're in as part of this here. And that can seem like it can seem like a lot to have to take on. It can seem like a high stakes process there. And because of that, there are sometimes reasons that students may not want to consider these sort of opportunities here. I'm not trying to downplay any of those reasons there, but I do want to make an argument for why I think this is something that every grad student should at least look into and consider if there might be a good option there. And so I want to go over a couple of reasons why students may feel like they shouldn't apply, or why that it's not something that would be beneficial to look into, and want to make the argument why even if that is the case, I think there's still at least a reason to look into this a little bit. So sometimes students may say, I already have funding. I came in with some sort of award. I have a research assistantship through my PI's grant, or I have I'm part of a scholarship program, or I'm getting some sort of funding here, or I have a research or a GA position as part of my funding. So what would be the point of that? Other times, the competitiveness of these opportunities is a barrier. And I don't want to downplay that. A lot of these are competitive by nature. The level of selectivity can really vary depending on the award there, but it's true that there unfortunately are more qualified applicants out there than there are opportunities to fund them with the sort of things that we're talking about here. And then also, sometimes there's a concern about the amount of time that it takes to prepare an application. A strong application is something that takes effort. You need to plan out ahead. You need to coordinate things sometimes with other people. You're going to be soliciting feedback. You're going to be revising, doing some careful thinking about that. And so I bring these points up not to say that these are irrelevant. These are all important concerns there. But I don't think that by themselves, these mean that you shouldn't at least look into or consider applying, because I think that there are some other benefits that can be important here as well. So this is my opening argument for why they should be thinking about this here. And really, I think that applying for funding, particularly for anybody who's in a doctoral program, anybody who's planning for a research-based career, this is a professional skill that you have an opportunity to learn as a graduate student. Some programs have grant writing courses. Some of you may have taken them or may know that you will take them at some point as part of your graduate training here. Whether or not, if that's the case, this is still something that you will be called upon to do again in your future careers if that is something you're interested in. If you want to be a professor, if you want to work in a research institute where there's grant funding as part of that. And it's a skill that you're going to learn by doing, by getting practice it, and this is a chance to be able to do that. If you're interested in a faculty job, in many cases, those are even more competitive than these opportunities, and many times the best applicants, the most qualified applicants, are ones who have secured funding, and doing so as a graduate student can be a great way to prepare yourself for that particular career path. Even if you were thinking about other options or you're not entirely sure, how you plan to use your graduate training, the program that you're in right now, I still think that there's value just intellectually in putting together an application, because the work that goes into it will help you clarify and communicate your goals and the significance of what it is that you want to do, and if it's a research-based program, of the work that you are doing within it there. And the ability to clearly and effectively communicate things to diverse audiences and to convince them of the merit of the work and of your qualifications is a valuable skill. And really, a grant or fellowship application is like submitting a manuscript. It's something that's going to be peer reviewed, and those who are selected for that can really point to that as a form of validation from the larger professional community that you're part of here as well. So I think that for those reasons, you should at least consider if there is a good option within your particular program or within your particular interest there. I recognize that there may not be, or for other reasons that there may be things that would interfere from doing that. And so I'm not saying everyone has to absolutely do this here. But again, I think it's worth at least considering if there is a good option, because there are ways in which you can benefit from the process itself, in addition to hopefully securing useful funding. So that was kind of my opening arguments. If you aren't already convinced that this is something that is worth thinking about here. But as I said, let's start with some basic concepts and ideas just to make sure everyone is on the same page here, because there's some terminology that gets used around this area that may or may not be familiar, and I want to make sure that we all have a common baseline of knowledge with all of this here. So I want to distinguish between a couple of different things here. The most basic one, which may seem pretty intuitive, is between internal and external funding. I mentioned that earlier as well. Internal funding basically means it comes from within this University of South Carolina, from the university itself or some other program within it. It could be from your department, it could be from your school, it could be from another office. Examples of this would be like the Spark Graduate Research Award, which comes from the Office of the Vice President for Research, the Belinsky Fellowship in the College of Arts and Sciences, the Presidential Fellows Program that the graduate school runs. These are all examples of funding that come from somewhere within the University of South Carolina. External funding means it's outside of the university. That could mean many different potential sources. It could be federal sources, it could be private foundations, it could be state agencies. I'll talk about some of those examples a little bit later here. That's the type of funding that I work with students on. I would definitely encourage you to seek out any internal funding that is available to you, and definitely take advantage of the support that may be provided by your program or the college that you're enrolled in. But the opportunities we're going to focus on tonight are ones that are from outside of the university. I want to distinguish between three terms as well that I admit sometimes are used interchangeably: fellowship, grant, and scholarship. Even funders don't always use these in consistent ways, but to the extent that they can be distinguished, I offer these definitions for each of those terms. A fellowship, I would say, is best to think of as an award that is meant to support you in some way. It's an investment in an individual, in their training and their development. What that looks like can vary. It might come in the form of stipend, a financial award that you are able to then use for whatever needs you might have. You can apply for living expenses and however you see fit for that. It might come with support for the cost of tuition. It might come with an amount that set aside for research-related expenses. It may be something that includes a larger cohort or programming that goes along with it. There's some fellowship programs that might involve trainings or conferences or events or courses and things and opportunities that go along with it there. In general, people who are participating in a fellowship are receiving the same sort of thing. There's not sort of an application where you indicate a certain need there. There's usually a standard stipend or a standard amount that's available for whatever expenses are eligible for that. So the fellowship is usually about you and about investing and supporting individuals because of their potential, because of the work that they're pursuing. Grants tend to be focused more on projects. It's money that is going for the purpose of carrying out a particular project. In many cases, a grant application will have a budget that you have to fill out, where you have to identify, these are the expenses that I need. These are the research costs that I have. I need to purchase this equipment. I need to travel to this location to do data collection. I need this amount of money to be able to compensate my research subjects. Those are the sort of things that a grant will usually do there, because the outcome is the project or the results of that project, the research, the data that you're going to end up collecting there. So in some cases, amounts might differ. You may be eligible to apply for up to a certain dollar amount there, but not everybody may be applying for the same amount because they have different project costs associated with that. A scholarship In some cases, can look like a fellowship. It could be money that's paid directly to you. In some cases, though, it's a little more restricted, and it may just be specifically for certain education-related expenses. It may be paid directly to your institution for your student account. It may be only able to be used for tuition, fees, or other sort of directly related educational costs. Whereas a stipend fellowship oftentimes is a little more flexibility in how that's going to be used there. Again, there are awards that I'm calling a grant that they might describe as a fellowship and vice versa. But I think this is one way to distinguish this. And the reason I bring this up is that it's important to recognize that not all awards cover the same thing and not all funds can be used in the same way. So if you see an award and you see that it pays X number of dollars there, it's always important to look into those details because sometimes there's significant variation in terms of what those funds can be used for and what the purpose of it really is. The last thing that I want to mention is postdoc, because postdoc is sometimes there are some positions that are referred to as postdoctoral fellowships. That's something that's a little bit different. Sometimes it's more like what I was talking about, a fellowship that invests in training and support there, that everybody receives the same sort of experience. There are a number of programs that are run through major organizations like the National Institutes of Health or the National Science Foundation or the American Council of Learned Societies. They provide fellowships, postdoctoral fellowship programs that support training for people who finish their doctorate degrees there. In other cases, a postdoc is really just a term-limited job. It might be a position a university is advertising. It might be for a year or 2 years or 3. It might be specific to the lab of a particular individual who has funding there. And that's something that's a little bit different here. I'm going to be doing a session next month on October 1st that's specific to postdocs and understanding what they are and how to go about identifying those opportunities. So if that's something that you're considering at some point in your career trajectory, we will take a deeper dive into those topics then, but I did just want to flag that because postdoctoral fellowship is a phrase that sometimes comes up, but we're not going to be focusing as much on that here tonight. So those are some basic terms just to make sure that we all have a good understanding of the concepts that I've been using and will continue to use here. I want to make a couple of additional observations about what I'm calling the landscape of graduate funding. The different factors and variations that can be at play in terms of what might be available here. And I will note this at different points in our time together this evening, but there's a lot of variation and it depends on the discipline, it depends on the program, it depends on the degree type, it depends on the stage that you may be within a particular degree program. So all of those factors are going to be distinct to each of you as individuals and potentially have a bearing on the sort of options that may be available here. I will stress as well that I will be making some generalizations, but there are numerous exceptions to these sort of things. So what is generally the case does not necessarily mean that will be applicable to your particular degree or your particular timeline or any of those things here. So keep that in mind as I try to share some general things that I think will be useful, recognizing that there is definitely variation to all of that. One thing that I think is important to note is that as a general rule, there is more funding at the doctoral level than there are for master's programs. I'm not saying that there's no money available at the master's level. Again, that can really vary out there, but a lot of graduate funding is connected with research. So if you're doing a research-based degree, an MA, an MS, a PhD, there is likely to be more opportunities for those type of degrees than for professional degree programs like a Master's of Education or Master's of Business Administration or most nursing degrees that aren't PhDs. So there is some funding for those types of awards there, but in general, there tends to be a larger amount of funding available for research-based degrees because a lot of funders out there are interested in investing in promising new ideas and new knowledge that's being generated in new ideas and findings that may be applicable to various purposes there. So the type of degree program you're in can have a significant bearing on the kind of options that might be available. Again, there are exceptions. There's a lot of other factors that can play into this as well. So I'm not saying that there is no funding out there, but just to try to set expectations and give some sense of how this works, because I know people are coming from different backgrounds. You may have done training in a different country before this here. In the case of the U.S., most of the funding is research related here, even though there is some sources that can support some of these other programs too. There are a number of different types of awards that can be available to graduate students. And they can be available at different sorts of stages here. So there are sometimes awards, and I'm thinking here primarily for doctoral funding for doctoral programs here, but there are some that focus on the early stages of that program here. They're meant either maybe to recruit people to pursue graduate degrees in certain areas there, or to provide support through that early stages there. So the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, Department of Defense have programs that are available that support multiple years of graduate funding that are meant for trainees, for students in that early stage. In some cases, you may have to apply within the first year or the first 2 years of a program to be eligible for that. The next window in which there may be opportunity for students is that research stage of a particular award. If this is a PhD program, typically this is something when you might need to be a PhD candidate. When you've completed all course requirements, when you've defended your proposal, completed any qualifying exams that are expected there, and are moved on to that all but dissertation stage here. And so these are awards that are meant to help with that research stage, to give you focused time, to give you funding, maybe again, if you need to do field work, if you're traveling to collect data. That's sort of the focus of that type of funding there. Another source of funding that can be available again for PhD programs are dissertation completion fellowships. These are fellowships that are meant to support that final stage of writing when you're really just trying to get everything done and defended and graduated there. And so these are awards where you may be doing that so that you don't have to teach, so you don't have to take on other responsibilities, and you can just focus on finishing that dissertation, defending it, depositing it, and graduating there. One thing to note about those types of awards is that they may have requirements about when you need to finish. They may say you have to finish your degree by this date. You have to graduate, or you have to have it defended or deposited. It varies depending on particular awards there by a certain point. In some cases, they may actually require your program to submit documentation promising not to give you any more money if you don't, for whatever reason, finish that. So these can be really great, critical sources of funding. I had one of these as a graduate student, and it was very helpful for me in the final year of my PhD program. But you do need to make sure that you really feel confident that you're going to be able to finish it within the parameters of that award, because there sometimes do come with conditions as part of that. And then I mentioned briefly before, there are also such thing as postdoctoral fellowships for providing additional training beyond completion of the PhD. And those come in different shapes and sizes. And again, we'll be doing a separate session for anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about that particular opportunity. So we've covered some basic concepts, gone over some terminology, get some generalizations about the types of funding and the stages in which that might be available here. Let's talk a little bit more practically about timing, about where you can look for to find these types of opportunities that I'm mentioning, and about how to figure out which options might be a good fit based on your particular program and circumstances and goals here. So the timing piece is something that's really important here, because most of these opportunities have a longer timeline. In some cases, these awards might just have a single deadline every year. And in many cases, they operate on an academic year cycle. So it's often the case that there may be a deadline in the fall. Applications are reviewed in early winter, into the early part of the new year, announcements made in the spring, funding available maybe for the summer or the fall of the next academic year. And for that reason, I strongly encourage anyone who's interested in this to plan a year ahead. Different competitions have different cycles. There are some that have shorter timelines. There are some that have deadlines in the spring, and the funding is still available by summer. So there are exceptions to this, but as a general rule, giving yourself a year's lead time is going to be helpful to make sure you don't miss out on an opportunity. Because, to give the example of the dissertation completion fellowship, if you want funding that's going to help you so that you can only focus on writing for that final year of your graduation of your program there, that oftentimes means that the fall of the year prior to that is when you might be actually submitting that application for that award. And so it does require a little bit of planning ahead to make sure that you are going to be in a position to use those funds if you are successful with your application there. For this reason as well, these types of awards, these external awards, are rarely a good way to meet like an immediate financial need. So I sometimes get questions from students about, is there funding that can help me for next semester or anything for this semester? That would be very unlikely. I never want to say categorically no because there are different timelines and some awards have a faster turnaround there. But as a general rule, just because of the way that these work, because of the cycles that take place, because of the time it takes to review everything, that would be very unlikely. And so I really encourage you to plan ahead, to take some time at whatever stage you're at now to identify some options that might be a good fit, so that you don't miss out on an application cycle there. This is something that's going to be somewhat dependent on the field that you're in as well. There are certain funders that have standard deadlines. National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, those deadlines are always the third week of October. Their doctoral dissertation research improvement grants, some of those vary, but many of them have two deadlines each year. National Institutes of Health pre-doctoral training awards, there are three deadlines that you can submit for each year, and depending on which one you submit for determines when those funds might be available if you're successful here. So depending on the program you're in, familiarizing yourself with whatever the cycle is for some of the options that might be a good fit can be really important here. And that will help you make an application plan. So you can work backwards and determine, okay, if I need to do field research in the third year of my PhD program, maybe I need to apply for something in October of year two to make sure that I can get that funding in time to support those activities that I'm planning for that third year. And that way you can just start making a list of the sort of things you're going to need, the application materials, whatever the anticipated review time is there, so that you are in a position to put together a strong application. And if you hopefully are successful, you'll be able to actually use that funding, because you don't want to be in a situation where if you were to apply for something, you wouldn't actually be able to use it because by the time the money would be available, you would either have graduated or would be past whatever stage in which the funding would be useful to you there. So definitely plan a little bit ahead here. It's never too early to start thinking about these kind of options. And just to visualize this a little bit, I know I talked before a couple minutes ago about those different types of funding, those early stage funding, that research funding, that writing funding, and then beyond here. This is a way to kind of visualize the types of funding and the types of activities that might be supported. This is a chart that's based on the sort of timeline that might be the case for a PhD in STEM or social science and humanities fields. I recognize that degrees have different lengths there. Maybe you're in a doctoral program that's shorter. Maybe you're a master's student here. So some of this will vary, but in general, this is a way to think about when you might apply for different types of funding, and what sort of things that might be available to help support you with as part of this here. Again, this is just visualizing what I was talking about over the last couple of slides here as well. And timelines vary, but that's another thing to be thinking about as well. What are the key stages for your particular program? When do you need to be doing your data collection or experiments? When will you be expected to finish your coursework and complete whatever qualifying exams, preliminary exams, comprehensive exams, whatever your program calls them, and defending your dissertation proposal, or working on your master's thesis or whatever the case might be here. So definitely think about those program milestones too, because that can have a bearing on when you can apply for something and when you might want to have funding for different stages of that. I mentioned this as well, but there are a variety of types of funders out there, and all of them have different goals in mind here. So there are federal and state agencies that have programs to support graduate students in a variety of different ways. Some of them offer professional experiences, some of them offer fellowships, some of them offer opportunities for you to conduct research at certain facilities there. Some offer loan forgiveness programs or basically pathways to employment within certain agencies and things like that. Private foundations sometimes have sources of funding as well. Professional societies can be a good source of funding too. The sort of entities that put on conferences like the Modern Language Association, American Historical Association, all of those kind of groups that maybe your faculty members have talked with you about, or you may be members of yourself there. Some of those organizations have awards that that graduate students can apply for to help support them. Sometimes companies have funding as well. They endow certain awards there. A number of tech companies have awards for people who are doing research related to artificial intelligence, computer science, computer engineering, those type of fields there, because it's relevant to their business. So depending on your field, there may be a number of different entities that have funding that may be interested in the kind of work that you're doing or interested in promoting your success in your particular career path here. But because all of these are different types of things with different types of goals, you need to do some research for this because funders have different missions. They have different reasons for why they want to support graduate funding. And a really good way to get a proposal rejected is to write a proposal for one funder and then just send it to another one without tweaking it at all, without kind of trying to tailor it there. Because you're almost certainly going to miss the mark because everybody is looking for slightly different reasons for this. And so when you're looking into an opportunity, it's good to know a little bit about who's responsible for it, what that organization wants to do, what are their priorities, what's their larger mission. Paying attention to any sort of language, reading over carefully any documentation that's provided in the request for proposals or the website for the opportunity there, looking over any information about past recipients of an award, because you might see that there's certain points of emphasis that come up, or certain types of projects, or people with certain types of backgrounds that have been most successful with these before here. A lot of funders also have resources for applicants. They host regular webinars where you can talk with people from these particular programs there. Some funders have their own guides for putting together proposals that they encourage people to look over. Definitely take advantage of all of that. And I think it's always useful when you can go to a webinar or something because it's good to hear how people who work for a particular organization talk about it themselves. That'll help you clue into what some of their priorities are, might help you figure out what will be the best way for you to show what you've done and what you want to do that aligns with their particular priorities here. And I'm just going to emphasize this again. Every funder has its own specific mission. And so I just pulled the logos of a number of major funding agencies that provide awards for graduate students. I'm not going to talk through every single one of these here, but just to highlight a couple of them so that you can see how they distinguish from each other. National Science Foundation, NSF, they're interested in basic science research. They want to know how is this research going to advance knowledge in its particular discipline for its own sake here. They're not interested primarily in the applications of that knowledge. This isn't where you want to emphasize, oh, I'm going to solve this particular problem for a business or this particular health condition there. That's not what their mission is. National Institutes of Health, on the other hand, they're focused on health. They want to improve health outcomes. They want to have a better understanding of particular health conditions. So you might have the same underlying research project, could potentially be eligible for an award with NSF and NIH, but you need to write those awards very differently because there are different priorities there. There are other organizations that aren't even specific to a particular discipline. AUW, the American Association of University Women, is an organization that's meant to promote opportunities for individuals who identify as women and who have a commitment to supporting opportunities for women and girls. So as if that's something that applies to you, you could be in any number of different types of programs as long as you can show how you fit with that mission for that particular organization. So that's why it's important to understand who's behind that funding, because again, sometimes this might seem like an obvious point, but sometimes you're working with a faculty member whose funding has always come from one particular agency. And so their framework is always, all right, we're tailoring this to this. I've gotten all my funding from the Department of Energy or from the Center for Disease Control. And, as a result of that, if you're applying for something different, sometimes the sort of training you've gotten there may not be as aligned with that opportunity. So definitely recognizing that there are different approaches you need to take depending on the particular priorities and mission of the organization that is offering the opportunity that you're looking at. So those are some general things about when rather to look for funding and understanding some of the organizations that are behind it. These are some great tools to actually start hunting for some of these opportunities that I've been mentioning here. And in a minute, we'll talk through a little bit of some of the factors that are important to keep in mind to help you find the most relevant results here. But there are a number of really good databases that I strongly recommend when I meet with graduate students to spend a little bit of time looking through. Because, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of variation. There are a lot of things that are going to be distinct to you. What's available to you is not necessarily going to be available to somebody else because of research interest, because of background, because of stage of program, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have the best sense of some of those things there, and this can enable you to be able to pursue these kind of options here. So Pivot is something that the university subscribes to. You can create an account for that, and it's a really powerful tool. It searches globally. It's very comprehensive. It's a really good source for finding more specialized types of funding there. It can take a little bit of effort to narrow it down and to figure out what you're exactly eligible for. And I'm happy to talk through with anyone in an individual meeting who has questions about that. But that's a great place for basically any program there. University of Illinois and UCLA have databases that are specifically tailored for graduate students. They've got a number of useful features that you can indicate I'm a master's student and I'm an international student and I'm looking for something that is going to be, in the social sciences, and different filters like that that allow you to narrow things down to hopefully find results that are most likely going to be a good fit for you. Zintellect is one that's specific to mostly STEM fields, and it contains a wide range of different options, not just fellowships and scholarships like I've been talking about here, but also different professional opportunities and opportunities to partner on certain projects. A lot of opportunities through government agencies, through research laboratories are available in Zintellect. And then professional associations, oftentimes those organizations either offer their own funding or they have ways of sharing opportunities that might be relevant for people in that particular field there. So again, the organizations that are sponsoring conferences that you may be going to, the professional societies that you may already be joining or that your faculty members are part of there, find out what sort of options they might have. Because maybe they send out regular newsletters. There's some organizations that have their own databases on their website. Some have email listservs. I'm part of some of these. I get updates through a number of different entities there. I mentioned before that I got the funding through a professional association as a graduate student. I'm still on an email listserv related to that, and I see things coming through there all the time. So if that's something that's available in your discipline, definitely take advantage of that. Find out where that information is, because that's where you're going to find a lot of opportunities that are going to be specifically relevant for people in your area. When you use these tools, though, there are a number of factors to keep in mind so that you are able to identify things that might be a good fit. Because, as I've said before, there are a lot of reasons why somebody might be interested in funding you as a graduate student. And it may be related directly to your research, your career goals, but it may be related to other factors too. So definitely think about all of those different factors that might be eligible. And I really encourage you to try to think broadly and try to think multidimensionally about why somebody might be interested in your work, because there are funders that might be interested in a particular discipline. It's a professional society. They say the American Chemical Association that is interested in people in the field of chemistry. Or it may be something that is more around a certain kind of outcome, an organization that's interested in health policy, an organization that has a certain social mission. And they might be interested in work that comes from a number of disciplines as long as it has relevance for that particular topic there, for example. So don't just limit yourself to your discipline. Think about, key things associated with that. And I'll talk through some additional factors that can help you parse that out a little bit more. And anytime you find something in these databases, go directly to the source. These databases, for the most part, are accurate and are updated regularly, but I do note sometimes things change and there's a little bit of lag between that. And so definitely go to the official site, see what their language is, make sure that the deadline matches up, check out whatever information that they have there. And if you can't find an answer to your question there, then do reach out directly to the programs, because all these different organizations have their own eligibility criteria, and they have people who work for them that are there to help you understand, because they're looking for good applicants. They want to be able to carry out their missions as well here. And so I talk to program officers, I send emails, call them on the phone, talk with them at different conferences and things like that. And that can be a really great source of information. And I encourage you to do the same, because sometimes there are situations, around eligibility or around research fit that aren't immediately clear when you read over the materials. It would just be helpful to get some a little more direct input, because you wouldn't want to go through the effort of putting together an application only to have it rejected for some sort of technicality. So those are some things to keep in mind when searching databases. Some other criteria to consider, I want to go over here now. And as I mentioned before, what is available, even for people who are in the same program or the same cohort in the same program, is going to vary, because there are differences in all of these potential topics here. And so as you're thinking about what sort of search terms to use, if you're using a database like Pivot or the University of Illinois one, I encourage you to do some related to your discipline in both a broad and in a more narrow way. So, something larger like humanities or social sciences or STEM, that would cast a pretty broad net, but there are sometimes funding opportunities that are open to applicants largely within one of those larger collections of disciplines, as well as things that might be specific to your program, to chemistry, sociology, political science, microbiology, whatever the case might be there. Because there are some that are more tailored to those particular disciplines or subfields within a discipline. Also, think about what your thematic focus is. Are you specializing on a certain aspect of a discipline there? Are you working with a particular population? Are you focusing on a certain age cohort or people from certain backgrounds, speakers of a particular language, residents of certain areas, people with certain backgrounds there? That can be relevant as well because there are funders who might have a special mission focusing on that particular group or topic there. Location for research can also be important as well, especially if you have any research that might take place in another country, because there are a number of programs that support research in a variety of different fields to take place in different countries. The Fulbright program in the United States through the State Department sponsors research awards for graduate students in over 140 countries around the world. And it's open really to any discipline. If you can make a case for why you need to be there to do the work you need to do, you're eligible to apply for that. Some other countries have programs that are meant to bring people to that country there. DAAD is the German academic exchange. It's about bringing people to Germany who need to be there for the work that they're doing there. Chateaubriand is a program for France. The American Scandinavian Foundation is for Scandinavian countries. And there are other examples beyond this as well here. So if you need to go to a lab in Germany because that's where the leading researchers are on this topic here, you might be able to apply to this program. If you need to do data collection because you're taking soil samples to apply for Arctic-related research, and you need to do that in the northernmost part of Sweden, then the American Scandinavian Foundation could be a good source for that as well. In the same way, there are also regionally focused professional associations that focus on studying different parts of the world. So my graduate training was in the field of Russian history, and that award that I mentioned previously was one that came through the Association for Slavic East European and Eurasian Studies, a professional organization that focuses on studying the countries, the cultures, the languages, the people, the history of that particular region of the world there. And so there are people who are part of that organization who are working in a wide variety of fields, but they're connected by that common interest in that particular area. And there are other organizations focusing on other areas as well, on Latin America, on South Asia, on the Balkans. So if you have a regional focus or a particular geographic area or a cultural group or speakers of certain languages, there may be funding that is available because of that particular point of connection. Some other factors that can be relevant as well have to do with methods. There are some fellowship opportunities that are particular to particular types of analysis, quantitative methods, using high performance computing, using hypothesis-driven research, supporting or not allowing research involving human subjects. So depending on the methods you're employing, that might open up some options or might close some down depending on a particular funder there. So not just what's the project and who you're going to do that, but what kind of work you're doing as part of that can be relevant. There are also factors that are going to be distinct to individuals and their background and identity that can be relevant as well. So citizenship can be a factor too. There are some opportunities, unfortunately, that are limited to U.S. citizens and permanent residents because of how the funding for that is done, particularly for a lot of federal opportunities because of the way Congress has authorized that funding. I wish that there was more flexibility around that, but unfortunately, that's not the case for some of those awards there. That is not the case for every funder, though. Not every funder has that restriction. And any of the databases that I mentioned have options that allow you to search by citizenship or to say, I'm an international student. And that can be a way to make sure that you're seeing options that you might be able to apply for. There's some awards that are particularly looking to support individuals from certain backgrounds or identities. And so that can mean a lot of different things. That could be socioeconomic status, it could be racial, ethnic, gender identity, disability. So thinking about every aspect of your own personal story and who you are can be relevant as well because there may be a funder that is interested in that. I mentioned AAUW, organization focused on opportunities for women. There are other organizations that have programs that prioritize increasing access for underrepresented groups and define that term in very different ways. And so think about that as well. Something else that can be a factor to consider is enrollment status. While there are exceptions to this, it's important to at least clarify whether or not an award would require you to be enrolled full-time. Sometimes awards related to this have requirements about not accepting other sources of funding or not doing other forms of work if you were to get that award. So that's something to just be aware of if you are a part-time student, or if you're working a job and going to school, that can occasionally have an impact here as well. And of course, you want to make sure that the timeline of the funder lines up with your particular timeline. Sometimes there are situations where maybe your discipline and your research is a good fit for a particular award, but that award requires you to be a doctoral candidate by this particular date. And unfortunately, your program is structured so that everybody in that program does it at a later date. So there are sometimes there's those moments where there's a mismatch between the way your program is structured and the time frame of a particular funder. So pay attention to those sort of details as well, so that you can make sure that you're finding opportunities that are going to be relevant to you and a good fit here. So all of these are factors to keep in mind. Again, I encourage you to use those databases. There's a lot of great options there. I'm always happy to talk through individually particular questions you might have around that. But all of these are factors to weigh in mind because I want you to cast a wide net and to not potentially overlook something that could be a good fit because you're focusing too narrowly just on one aspect of your research or just on your discipline. Because there are, again, a number of reasons why an organization might be interested in providing graduate students with funding. So let's talk a little bit about what the application process can entail. Again, there's a lot of variation when it comes to this stage here, so I'll just be mentioning some general statements here, but I think it's worth just sort of giving you some idea about the sort of materials you might end up preparing as part of this. So these are some common application materials. Not every award will require all of these. Some of them may have entirely different things as part of it. But in general, there's going to be some sort of requirement where you are going to be basically writing out some sort of proposal about your interest in this opportunity. If it's research-based, this is going to be a proposal for the research you want to do, where you're making an argument for why the research is significant and innovative and feasible, and why it's a good fit for that particular opportunity. It might be some sort of statement of interest or letter of interest or prompt that is asking you to explain why you're a good fit for this sort of opportunity, but some sort of thing that aligns with the purpose and where you explain the activities you propose to do with that funding or the research that you plan to do is pretty standard. Some awards also ask for personal statements. Usually these are meant to give you a chance to share about your own intellectual and professional formation and the sort of life experiences and previous activities that you've engaged in that have helped shape your particular interests or help prepared you for a certain opportunity. In some cases, funders may ask you questions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, your understanding or experience with those particular concepts there. Again, not always the case. Personal statements are not always required or expected, but that is something to just be aware that you could be asked to speak to some of those sort of things there. If it's anything that's like a grant or something like a completion fellowship or something that's meant for an extended period of research, a budget and especially a timeline is something you may be asked to create as well. A lot of times if there's a budget, the funder will provide you with a format to follow. You may need to submit a budget justification, which is a document where you explain how you arrived at the figures that you are submitting there and what those numbers represent. If it's a fellowship for dissertation completion, you may need to submit samples of work in progress there to show that you're already working on the dissertation, that you've made some progress, and that you're in position to actually be able to finish the award on time. Oftentimes, it might be the case that the dissertation chapter you submit can't be like the introduction or the literature review. It needs to be one of the substantive chapters. Again, that varies though, and so pay attention to any of those kind of requirements to make sure that you have the materials necessary for submitting that application. And then more standard expected things like a CV, transcripts, or letters of recommendation. Those are important things to keep in mind too. And I do want to emphasize a little bit about letters of recommendation. Those can carry a lot of weight, maybe more than you would expect for some graduate awards, particularly research ones there. So it's really important to make sure that you're in communication with whoever you might ask to write, that they are prepared to write a strong letter. They know your work, that they understand what the opportunity is there. You really want to avoid a situation where somebody writes a letter and they're not as familiar with your project, or maybe you haven't really been communicating as closely with them as maybe you should have, and you're writing one thing in the research proposal and they're writing something else in the letter of recommendation about what the project's about. That's a really good way to get a proposal scored lowly or potentially rejected is not viable. So pay attention to those recommendation letters, be in good communication with your research mentors, make sure they understand what work you're doing, make sure they understand what the particular opportunity is so that they can tailor that letter and really write a strong recommendation for you. In terms of things you can be doing at whatever stage you're at as well, these are just things that I think will help you be set up for success in graduate school in general. But strong applicants typically have significant experience and accomplishments. I don't want to put a number on any of these things here because that really varies depending on programs. There's some programs, there's some research areas and disciplines where there's just a lot of publication that goes on, and everybody who's in the lab is listed as an author. In that case, the issue of author order maybe carries a lot more weight. In other disciplines, particularly humanities and social science, you might be mostly submitting work that's single authored. And if you have one publication in a decent journal by the time you graduate, that might be a really great accomplishment. And that's sort of the standard that you're aiming for. So this can really vary. Pay attention to what those targets are within your particular field. Talk with faculty or more advanced graduate students in your programs there to get some sense of what that might look like if you have questions about it. But otherwise, just being involved in research, being active in your field, presenting at conferences, publishing your work, any honors, recognitions, awards are helpful as well. Many funders have an interest in your outside involvement. Broader impacts is a category that is used by the National Science Foundation, and other funders have similar sort of ideas there. And so showing how you're involved, service to your discipline, to the university, through your department, teaching, mentoring, outreach work, all of those things can be useful to demonstrate your commitment to those sort of things here. So in general, these are the things that I think are going to set you up for success, particularly in a doctoral program. But be thinking about how to build that competitive profile, because these sort of things tend to have a cumulative impact. You get that first award, maybe that smaller source of funding, and that helps increase the confidence of reviewers for another opportunity that you're doing promising work, and makes it more likely that you'll get that next award and then that next one beyond that. So there's some strategizing and some planning ahead that can go into applying for these kind of opportunities. And just very briefly, I will be doing a workshop next week for STEM disciplines and the week after for humanities and social sciences on writing research-based proposals, and we'll take a deeper look at what goes into the different sections of that here. But regardless of what the format is, regardless of what the requirements are, fellowship and grant applications are arguments. You're making a case about why you should get the thing, why you're the right person to do this experience or undertake this research or receive this funding at this particular time. And so a strong application is one where you can show that fit, why you're the right person, why the research you want to do fits with the priorities and missions of that agency, why it's something that's important to do because it advances the mission of that agency and it makes a contribution to your discipline, why this is the right time for you to do it because you have the proper training, because you're at the right stage in your graduate program, because you have the support and mentorship, et cetera, in place to be able to do that. So regardless of what that looks like, every part of a fellowship or grant application is making that argument. And I really encourage you to think about it in that light, because that will help you be strategic about how you tailor that application. And again, I'll be doing a session next week and the week after that takes a much deeper look at this, and particularly disciplines, and really thinks about what a successful research proposal looks like and why, if you're interested in going further in this particular topic here. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground. As we start to wind some things up here at the end, I want to talk about next steps and then talk about some resources here. So what I would encourage all of you to do, if you haven't had a chance to investigate some of the research opportunities, spend some time with those databases. Again, I will send you those slides, that information tomorrow, and you can spend some time in the coming days and weeks taking a look and see what sort of things are available based on the criteria I shared there, and start building that list. Make a personal timeline, put together a checklist of awards you might be interested in. Consider making an appointment with me. I'm happy to talk with you individually to get a sense of what you're interested in, to help you strategize about what might make a compelling application, to, in some cases, connect you with other resources on campus here, give you feedback on your proposal. The amount of time it takes to put together an application can really vary. There are some that you should start planning it, 9 months to a year in advance. There are others that can come together a little more quickly. But I would say at the very least, try to give yourself 3 months. It takes time. It'll take you longer than you expect to put together a good application. Give yourself the luxury of being able to work on something, then set it aside and come back to it after you've gotten some feedback from other people. Because I guarantee you will be surprised at the things that you will see and the things that you might decide you would want to change based on that. And so plan early. It is possible to do things faster. I do know students who've been successful in doing that, and I'm happy to work with you at whatever stage there. But if you're thinking ahead, give yourself enough time to be able to do that. And tell the faculty you're working with, anybody who might write a letter of recommendation, especially your advisor, members of your dissertation committee, what your plans are, so that they can be on board with that, so they can support you in it, and so that they can be prepared to write recommendations, that that's going to be part of what you're going to need for that here as well. And when you do that, share drafts of your materials. So again, that they know exactly what it is that you're proposing, so they can make sure that they are echoing that and supporting that particular application that you're working on. And I'm happy to meet with any of you who are working on applications as well to complement that discipline-specific support. I'm happy to read over your materials, to give you some suggestions on how to organize things and how to communicate effectively. And I encourage you to get me that a month before the deadline if possible. Again, that's not a hard requirement. I will read it earlier or closer to the deadline, but I think it will be most beneficial if you can get that in at least a month beforehand, because that gives you a chance to revise, to process, to think, to get some feedback maybe from some other people, and the quality of your application will be significantly improved as a result of that. So those are some steps you can be taking right now or in the coming weeks here that I would encourage you to do as a nice follow-up to what we've covered here this evening. And then before I say a little bit about our office here, I just want to encourage you to be persistent and to recognize that people who have been successful in their careers have oftentimes been unsuccessful at various things along the way as part of that. And I'd like to talk about the idea of the shadow CV. This is something that a number of people have talked about, but I like this particular article that came out about it a decade ago, honestly, from the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is this idea of what if you wrote up a CV of all the things you didn't get? The manuscript that got rejected, or maybe it was published, but it had to go through 4 rounds of revision and it was rejected by the first journal you sent it to, or the grants you didn't get, or the jobs you applied for and you didn't get. And the reason for that is just a reminder that even people who've been very successful in their careers have been applying for things and trying opportunities that they ultimately didn't get. And one of the things that the highly successful people have done is that they've been able to be persistent and to learn from those opportunities, and to be able to pivot and to take feedback and to recalibrate and to find other things to continue to move forward. And I don't say this to try to sort of sell you on some forced optimism and say that everything's going to be great, or to try to minimize the emotional toll that it can take from getting rejected for things. I have applied for many things. I have gotten some of them. I've not gotten more of them. And I know what that feels like, and I'm not trying to downplay that at all. But again, I just want to encourage you that anybody who's in a graduate program is doing so because they have goals and ambition and are doing something that's hard. And so I would encourage you to be persistent in that, and to recognize that there may be setbacks along the way, but oftentimes that is going to be inevitable for doing the sort of things that you ultimately want to be able to do. A couple other things that you can do. I mentioned those workshops that are coming up for writing proposals in STEM and humanities and social science disciplines. Those are going to be hybrids. You can come in person at CloseTip, or you can sign up virtually. You can scan this QR code. Again, that information will be in the follow-up email, as well as the session on postdocs that's coming up in a couple of weeks here. And there are a couple of other ways you can connect with our office if you're not already getting some of our resources here. One of them is just to go to our website. You can find information on scheduling appointments. That's my picture right there on the side. You can sign up for our newsletter that I'll mention again a little bit more about in a moment here. And there's some other materials that are available there. If you just go to sc.edu and search National Fellowships, that'll take you to our office's main page, and you can click on the graduate student section and see the information specific to current graduate students there. Additionally, we have a great group of current students who have won a variety of different awards who volunteer as fellowship peer mentors. So these are all current graduate students at the University of South Carolina in different disciplines, different programs. For this semester, our website needs to be updated. We're in the process of doing that right now. We have 18 current students who are volunteering with our office. Those are the awards that those students have won here. And I would encourage you, if you see somebody in a field that is your field or similar to it, and you'd like to just learn a little bit more about their experience, or because they've won a particular award that you're interested in, definitely reach out to them. They're available to answer questions and share their experience. We even have a program where we will pay for you to get coffee with them on campus. And so please spend our money, talk with some great students, get that up close perspective from people who've gone through this recently and know what it's like to be a fellow at this university. And again, there's some contact information that's available on our website. I'm hoping by the end of next week, we should have that up to date. Our communications team is working on that right now. But you can reach out to me directly too, and I can give you contact information if you're looking for a particular person. Also have some resources that I can make available to people as well. I've got some information around certain books and articles that are specific to grant writing in particular disciplines or for particular funding opportunities here as well, including some lists of fellowships that are specific for international students. Again, some of these are resources that I've already embedded into this presentation here, but I'm always happy to connect you with more specific tools if that is the case for the sort of thing that you're looking if you're looking to apply for. And then I mentioned briefly before, some of you may already be getting this, but we send out a newsletter for graduate fellowship opportunities. You do have to sign up for this. It's not automatically sent out to all of you here. So you can scan that QR code, or again, the link will be in the follow-up that I'll be sending here. It's called Grad Fellowship Focus. You can also sign up for it on our website. And this is a place that we use to highlight upcoming events, the workshops and sessions that our office is doing to highlight upcoming opportunities. We send out some of the major fellowships with deadlines coming up in the next several months so that you can be aware of things that are potentially of interest with short descriptions of what those awards are for. It's not aimed at any one particular discipline here, so it will be a wide range of opportunities, but that can give you some sense of some of the options that are out there. We also profile students who have won different awards, so you can learn a little bit more about the type of funding that students are applying for here and the very interesting things that they're being able to do with that. So this goes out twice a month in the fall semester because there are a lot of deadlines during that time of year, and then once a month for the rest of the year. I encourage you to sign up for that. It's a good way just to be aware of some of the things that are going on in the world of outside funding. And then, as I mentioned before, I am happy to talk with any of you individually. You can get in touch with me by sending me an email. My office is on the second floor of the Close Hip building in the Graduate Student Resources Hub, 204B. You can also schedule one-on-one meetings with me, virtual or in person, at calendly.com/gradfellowships. Happy to talk. Again, happy to work with you on an application and to help you strategize around any of these sort of things here, or to follow up again to learn a little bit more about your particular situation to see what sort of things might be a good fit here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. I'll stop the recording at this point, and I'm happy to answer questions for any of you here about anything that we've covered.